This is our fourth and final webinar in our series of statistics-related informational webinars. My name is Victoria Sklavos. I'm an information officer at the IPC, and I may have communicated with some or many of you over the years by email or by phone, so I'm very pleased to be with you today, and we're very pleased to hold this webinar. Also note that I'll be using Part 10 and CYFSA interchangeably throughout this presentation. So these are the areas that we'll be covering today. We'll begin by looking at 2020 compliance rates, then turn to CYFSA Part 10 statistics requirements. We'll briefly look at some administrative aspects of the report, such as login information, setting up a new account. After that, we'll delve right into the statistics questionnaire with a selected overview of the stats survey, focusing specifically on the sections about which we get the most questions. We will then turn to some helpful tips and takeaways. We'll finish off with that, share a few IPC statistics resources with you, and how to contact us if you ever have any questions or concerns about your statistical report. I wanted to begin, though, with this quote from Commissioner Cosim, taken from last year's annual report. With the ongoing pandemic and the challenges it's created for everyone, we want to thank you for continuing to champion access and privacy rights in times of uncertainty. So we're committed to working with you, our stakeholders, in upholding these rights during these very challenging times, now and in the future, and whatever that new normal is. So before we move forward, let's take a look back at last year's annual report, specifically about Part 10 compliance rates. Okay. So of the 7,037 access requests service providers received in 2020, nearly three-quarters, 75%, were responded to within the 30-day time limit. Given the fact that last year was the first reporting year requirement, Ontario's child and family services sector overcame the operational challenges of an unprecedented year. So we wanted to commend and recognize you all for your diligence in responding to the reporting requirements under Part 10 despite these difficult circumstances. On that positive note, let's turn to Part 10 statistics requirements. Just a few items here that may be helpful to everyone. Child and family service providers who are subject to Part 10 of the CYFSA are required to provide the IPC with an annual report on requests for access and correction to records of personal information, privacy breaches, and other types of statistics during the previous calendar year. Okay, moving on. If you've ever wondered why this report is required, it's set out under Section 11 of the Ontario Regulation 191.18 under the CYFSA. So herein lies the statutory requirement to submit your Part 10 statistics to the IPC. Note, however, if you experienced zero access and correction requests and zero privacy breaches, please enter 0 in Sections 3.1, Access section of the report, 8.1, the Correction section of the report, and 10.1, the Privacy Breach section of the report. And we're going to go through these sections shortly. But basically, if you've had 0 on all 3 fronts, skip the remaining sections and submit the report. It's that easy. That said, also note that if you are primarily a health information custodian under Ontario's health privacy law, the Personal Health Information Protection Act, or PHIPA, and you experienced 0 access and correction requests under the CYFSA and 0 privacy breaches under the CYFSA, you do not have to submit this report for as long as you are primarily a health information custodian. Another point, here's another statistical requirement here. Only count written requests made by individuals or by their substitute decision makers for their records of personal information under Section 313.1 of the CYFSA. So if you look at 313.1, you will find out the access rights that individuals have and their substitute decision makers on their behalf. A word of note here, please do not count informal requests. Although your clients may obviously have the statutory right to make an informal request, for statistical reporting purposes, we are capturing only we're only capturing formal requests, something that's in writing, okay, that you've received for the purposes of making a request for access to personal information. Finally, if the request was made by a third party, such as another service provider, do not count this as an access request, even if the individual gave consent. Therefore, do not include third-party requests, only count the requests that are received directly from a client or their substitute decision makers on the client's behalf. If third parties make the request, these are the types of requests that we are not capturing for statistical reporting purposes. Now let's briefly look at a few administrative aspects of the statistical report, namely login information and how to set up an account. This here is the statistics homepage, statistics.ipc.on.ca. If you have your login ID and password, you are set to log on and complete your report. If, however, you have forgotten your password, I want to draw your attention to the bottom left-hand corner of this landing page. You can click on Forgot Password, or where it says Forgot Your Password or Login ID, please click here. This will take you to this web page, the Login ID and Password Recovery page. Remember that your login ID is always your institution number. As long as the system has the correct primary email address for your institution, then you can input this and click on Recover. What will happen then is an automatic email will be sent to the primary email address with instructions on how to reset the password. Okay. Setting up a new account. Let's look at this here, because many of you, either last year or this year, you've created new accounts because it was the first reporting year last year. So if you ever need to set up a new account, click on the Please Register Here link on the home page again, the bottom left-hand corner. This will take you to a page where you will be asked to include this information that you see here. Everything from the name of your organization, the name and email address of the head of the organization, the name, mailing address, email address, and telephone number of the primary contact. The primary contact is usually the one that actually submits the report on behalf of the organization. So it's important that we have that correct, up-to-date contact information, especially when it comes time to resetting your password, because it's the primary contact email that will receive the automatic message on how to reset the password there. And of course, your language preference, English or French. Okay. Now, before we move on to the survey, I just want to focus on this portion of the registration page. When setting up a new account, you'll be asked to check off the reports that apply to you. And so I've highlighted this in the red box here. Please ensure you've checked off the applicable reports that apply to your organization, primarily the CYFSA report. Okay, so the report here at the bottom right. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call us about this, because we have seen a few times, there are a few cases where we've seen that multiple boxes have been picked or selected, other statistical reports have been selected that don't apply to service providers necessarily. So at minimum, you definitely have to check off this box, and like I said, please bear that and keep that in mind. All right, so moving on to the actual statistics questionnaire. I'm now going to provide you a selected overview of the sections about which we get most questions. All right, so first off, let's look at section 2.1 of the report. In this section, we are looking for the number of uses or purposes for which personal information was disclosed that was inconsistent with your written public statement of information practices. Now, here's a tip. This section does not relate to breaches. That section comes later on in the report under section 10. But for this section, simply look at your written public statement, and if you have not used personal information outside of or inconsistent with the written public statement, then input 0 here, okay? In fact, the majority of submissions we've received have 0 in this section. A little bit more context, an example. Let me give you an example of an inconsistent use. It would be if you, let's say, used personal information for the purposes of research, and that use was not set out in the written public statement. Please also note that the boxes below, I also want to draw your attention here at the box below here, where you see 3 boxes. I like to think of these boxes as a fork in the road in terms of how the rest of your report will unfold. Ensure that you've checked off the right box, okay? It's very critical that you do this because it will impact the rest of your report. If you receive no access and correction request, check off the first box. This will take you to Section 10 of the report, the privacy breach section, okay? If you received 1 or more written access requests during the year, check off the middle box. This will take you to the next section of the report, Section 3, which we'll be looking at shortly. If you only received correction requests, check off the third box. This will take you to Section 8, where you can input your correction stats. Okay? So please keep in mind, if you check off the wrong box, let's say you checked off the first box and no access or correction request, and then proceed to input data in subsequent sections, you will receive an error message when it comes time to submit your report. So to avoid any error messages, please ensure that the correct box is selected in this section from the very beginning and proceed from there. Now, let's look at Section 3 of the report. Section 3.1 captures the number of written access requests received from individuals or their substitute decision makers under Section 313, subsection 1 of the CYFSA during the reporting year. And as you can see, for statistical reporting purposes, the reporting year runs through from January 1st through to December 31st. Okay? Here, for the purposes of this statistical example, this presentation, I've put in 4. Now let's look at time to completion for access requests. Now, Part 10 of the CYFSA requires service providers to respond to access requests within 30 calendar days. You probably know you may extend this time limit in some cases by no more than an additional 90 calendar days and remain in compliance with Part 10. This is pursuant to Section 314, subsection 3 of the CYFSA. Now, a time extension is only permitted where responding within 30 days would unreasonably interfere with operations due to the volume of records, let's say, or perhaps there's a need for a lengthy search, and 30 days would not be practical because of the time required to access the requester's right of access. So in these scenarios, you can extend the time limit by issuing what's called a notice of extension, a written notice of extension to the individual requesting access. So in this section, Section 4, please input how long it took your organization to complete all requests for access to information. The total in this section represents the total number of access requests completed. Okay? For many of the upcoming sections, this is very important to note, all points lead to Section 4.4. And as we will see, the various breakdowns in subsequent sections must tie back to this total number of completed requests under Section 4.4. So please keep that in mind. Moving on, Section 5. Now, Section 5 delves further into compliance rates. It covers the number of requests completed within the statutory time limit, the 30 days, and in excess of the time limit under each of these 2 scenarios. So as you can see, Part A is the first scenario, no time extension is issued. Part B, the scenario is a time extension notice is issued. Now, both Part A and B within Section 5 are mutually exclusive and will be used to determine the number of requests that are in compliance or not in compliance with the statutory timelines under Part 10. So we'll see a breakdown here. In this section, we see the breakdown for Part A. No time extension notice was issued, and I've put 3 here within 30 days, and although they were completed where no notice of extension was issued. Okay, so that's Part A. Part B, as we can see here, a notice of extension was issued. And so one of those completed requests were completed within the time limit permitted under the time extension notice. Okay, so 3 plus 1 is 4. It adds up to section 4.4. It all ties back to there. Now, staying on the same slide, please note that the section 5 here also gives an organization an opportunity to write any reasons that made it difficult for your organization to meet the 30-day time limit to completion. You can also include circumstances you believe will improve your ability to be in compliance with Part 10 in the future. So if you have not reached compliance with respect to time to completion, please feel free to input any reasons here, explaining the variance, explaining any issues that you may have had. Obviously, this was a challenging year with the ongoing pandemic, so please explain it here, and we'll be able to look at that. Section 6. Let's look at Section 6 of the report here. This section captures the number of requests completed in each situation. So it talks about the disposition or outcome of access requests. Okay? So what course of action was taken for each of the requests completed. This section will ask for information about how you handled each request for access to records of personal information. As you can see, there are various outcomes listed in this section, but I would like to highlight one outcome scenario in particular, partial access. And I've highlighted this with this red box here at the top, box 6.2. Keep in mind, if the outcome of an access request was one in which you withheld or redacted part of the record because provisions of Part 10 were used to deny access in part, please count this as a partial access outcome, as we see here in box 6.2. I put 4 here. 4 of the completed requests were actually partial access provided because it was either, like I said, use 6.2 partial access when you withhold or redact part of the information of the record because provisions of Part 10 were used to deny access in part. Okay, so I really wanted to highlight that point there. It's also worth noting that the sum of all outcomes that we see here should be equal to or greater than the amount in Section 4.4, the total number of access requests completed. One final note before we move on to the next section. I'd like to draw your attention to the yellow box at the bottom here, box 6.11 here. This total represents the total number of requests where access to information was denied in whole or in part because provisions of Part 10 were used to deny access. This number should be less than or equal to the total in the next section, Section 7, that we're about to look at right now, okay? Should be greater than, I beg your pardon, greater than and equal to the total in the next section, Section 7, provisions apply to deny access. So we're going to take a look at that right now. Section 7 of the report. Now, this is another section on which we often get questions. In this section, you're asked to indicate which Part 10 provision you applied to those requests where your organization withheld some or all of the requested information. Every request that was withheld in part or in full must have at least one provision listed, but may have more than one. So therefore, there's no correlation between the total sum of the total sum of Section 7 and the total number of requests completed as entered in box 4.4. Why? Because more than one provision may be applied to a given request, and a given provision may be applied to more than one request. Okay? So that's why we've highlighted this box at the bottom, where box 7.8, the total number of provisions applied, must be greater than or equal to 6.11 there. Okay? All right, so we're going to briefly touch on correction requests under sections 8 and 9 of the report. These sections of the report will ask you to provide the number of correction requests you received and the number of times you responded within 30 calendar days, extended the deadline to respond with or without a notice of extension, exceeded the notice of extension, refused the request based on one of the exceptions under Section 315.6, 9, or 10, okay, and received a statement of disagreement. So sections 8 and 9 will capture these particular items here. Now, turning to the final section of the report, which covers sections 10 through 14 and captures statistics related to your privacy breaches. So it's an annual reporting of privacy breaches, sections 10 through 14. Let's look at a few important aspects of these sections. Do not count each incident more than once, okay? If one incident includes more than one of the following 4 categories, choose the category that it best fits. Stolen information, lost information, used without authority, disclosed without authority. These are the 4 breach categories under Part 10. So this is what we're going to be embarking on in the upcoming sections, each of the breach categories here. Okay. Another item that I want to bring to your attention here, you must include all privacy breaches in the reporting year, regardless of significance, and even if you were not required to report them to the IPC at the time they occurred. Okay, so this is an all-encompassing submission. Include all privacy breaches where you notified the affected parties, whether or not you notified our office during the course of the year. Please include those and anything else that you did not notify our office about, and irrespective of how significant the breach was. A breach is a breach, and we need to capture it here for statistical reporting purposes. Okay. Moving on. Count a privacy breach in the year it was discovered, even if it occurred in a previous calendar year. So we do get questions about this often. Let's say you discover something was lost or stolen in 2021. You discovered it, but it actually occurred in 2019. So you're going to count that as a privacy breach in 2021, the year in which it was discovered, not in the previous calendar year, even if it occurred then. Okay? Hopefully that clarifies that aspect. So now we're going to move on to the actual statistical section, the sections of the report that deal with privacy breaches. Starting with Section 10. Let's look at Section 10. It represents the total number of privacy breaches. This is the total across the 4 breach categories for statistical reporting purposes: lost, stolen, used without authority, disclosed without authority, all of which tie back to this section here. When added together, it must equal to the total number in Section 10.1. So all points lead to Section 10.1. Please keep that in mind there. If there's an imbalance in between this section and the breach category sections that are coming up, the system will flag this by way of a prompt or an error message and will not allow you to proceed or submit the report until the imbalance is corrected. Needless to say, it's a very critical section of your report, and for the purposes of this presentation, I've just arbitrarily put 13 as a total number of breaches. Okay, so now let's turn to each breach category, starting with stolen personal information. As you can see, the first thing you're asked to input is the total number of breaches for the category in question. You will then be asked to provide a further breakdown as follows. Who committed the breach? So you can see that here. Was it theft by an internal party, a theft by a stranger? Okay. The next breakdown will be how many are attributed to, as we can see here, a ransomware. How many are the result of a ransomware attack, a cyber attack, unencrypted USB key? That's another breakdown that we're looking at as it relates to the total stolen. For the purposes of this presentation, I have 0, but it's important just to know what the breakdowns are, okay? And finally, as you can see on this slide, you're asked for a breakdown along the lines of how many people were affected per breach under this category, okay? So the reason why we're going through this line by line, at least for most of the sections, is because we often get questions about imbalances and resulting error messages. So hopefully this helps to clarify how to report the breakdown of each breach category and ensure everything adds up, all right? So the next breach categories we can see here is lost personal information. Much like the previous breach category, once again, you're asked to input the total number of breaches related to lost information and provide a breakdown. Now, we won't go into detail about the breakdown of this section, but it's similar to the previous section. But as you can see, the breakdown this time around is along the lines of the total breaches due to lost information. How many were the result of ransomware? Again, ransomware, cyber attack, an unencrypted USB key. Maybe you have paper-based records, whether or not those were lost, or if the loss was a result of something else, or other items may have been lost as well. So the breakdown here follows that order. In this, again, we're being asked to provide a breakdown of the number of affected people or individuals per breach under this category. And again, this may be a good opportunity to reiterate, once again, count a privacy breach in the year it was discovered, even if the breach occurred in a previous calendar year. Because sometimes this, whether it's lost or stolen, sometimes you become aware of this at a future date, not the date in which it was occurred. But for statistical reporting purposes, please count the privacy breach in the year it was discovered, okay? And this applies to all breach categories, whether it was lost or stolen, used without authority, or disclosed without authority, okay? So speaking of used without authority, we'll move on to that breach category. Once again, we're asked for a breakdown of the total breaches under this category. First, the means through which personal information was used without authority. Of all that total, how many people were affected per breach under this category as well? So in this section here, I also want to draw your attention to the red box right over here where my cursor is. We often get questions about what constitutes a use in this context for statistical reporting purposes. What we wanted to really draw your attention to is that when you're looking at this breach category, think of what was viewed or handled improperly and without authority. And then that would be input here. You would input that type of breach under this particular section, section 13. So it's very important that just to distinguish a use, if it's used or viewed or handled without authority improperly, then this is the section to apply that breach. And again here, another breakdown, as I mentioned earlier. As you can see, it's also of the total number of breaches that were attributed to use without authority, how many individuals were affected. The final breach category is disclosure without authority. By now, you've probably noticed a pattern in terms of the similar questions that are asked under each breach category, the total amount and the respective breakdowns, okay? You may have also noticed that under each breach category and the breakdown therein, there is a recurring instruction to count each incident only once. Each incident only once, where my cursor is. This is a recurring instruction under each breach category and under each breakdown for that matter, okay? And so what do we mean by that? What this means is count each incident, but only once. Please do not double count. So to elaborate on this very important point, I'll give you an example. If one incident includes more than one of the 4 breach categories, let's say if an employee, you have a staff member who accessed personal information without authority and then turned around and disclosed that information improperly and without authority, you have to count that incident as either a use or a disclosure, but not both, not both. Otherwise, you'd be double counting. So whatever best fits, input that breach under that particular category that it best fits. So as you can see here, disclosed without authority, we're capturing the incidents where unauthorized disclosure was through misdirected faxes, misdirected emails, or other means. We have a recent blog. The Commissioner issued a recent blog on misdirected emails, so that may also be a very good resource to look at as it relates to how to handle misdirected emails. Another breakdown, finally, under disclosed without authority, once again, as you can see from previous sections similar to them, we also see here that another breakdown is the total number of breaches attributed to disclosed without authority, how many individuals were affected per breach, okay? And for the purposes of this presentation, I just put all 13 were affected, were applied to disclosed without authority, and 13 where one individual was affected, all right? So if you've input all information, what will happen is it will take you to the bottom of the report where you can submit questionnaire. You can see where my cursor is here. It's very to submit the questionnaire here. Otherwise, it won't capture. If you exit or log off without clicking submit, then we have had times where people have called us back, organizations, to say, I input my information, but I don't see it there. And it may very well be something as simple as not clicking the submit or not saving as you go on. My suggestion is click submit, log off, and exit your browser, and then perhaps log on back again and see if the information should be there. Also, you can also, for your own records, print out a copy or save it as a PDF by clicking on this button here, view a printer-friendly version. Okay. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention is that you don't have to submit or complete your report in one sitting, not in one sitting. You can save as you go, and the next time you log on, the system will take you to the last section where you left off, okay? As long as you submit your report by the March 31st deadline, once you submit, you're going to get this type of message, thanks for your cooperation. You should also receive an automatic email in your inbox, the primary contact who's primarily responsible for submitting the report, confirming that you submitted your report, okay? But also note, if you submit before the deadline and you find out that you need to update the report, amend it, or correct it in some way, you can change the report up to and including the date of the deadline date, which is March 31st, 2022, okay? Some tips and takeaways. We shared a few tips throughout the presentation, but I really want to highlight these ones here. Only count written access requests or written correction requests made by the individual or their substitute decision makers acting on their behalf for records of personal information. Please do not include informal requests. We're only capturing formal written requests. If a request was made by a third party, such as another service provider, do not include this as an access request, even if the individual gave consent. The request has to come directly from the requester, from the individual, or their substitute decision maker. Do not count each breach incident more than once. I know that we just covered that, but it's a very important issue. Don't count each breach incident more than once. If one incident includes more than one of the 4 breach categories, choose the category that it best fits. Otherwise, we may run the risk of double counting. So we certainly want to avoid that and ensure that the statistics are correct and accurate there. Keep track of statistics over the course of the calendar year. I know many of you do this. It's just a gentle or friendly reminder of that it really helps this time of year. If you're tracking it throughout the course of the year, this time of year when it comes time to submit your statistics, it will be easier to do so. And again, just a few administrative tips here, because we are getting a few questions about this. Always remember your login ID is your institution number. That will never change. Your login ID is always your institution number. And only the primary email address will receive an automatic email when resetting a password. So please ensure that if there are any personnel changes, if there's a successor to the role and there's been maybe no knowledge transfer between the two in terms of login details, ensure that we're made aware of a personnel change so we can update our records. That way, when it comes time to, let's say, reset the password, the primary email address is correct, and that address will receive the automatic email on how to reset the password. Okay, so this is a very important part, even before you begin the statistics questionnaire. What I also wanted to draw your attention to were a few statistics resources that I think will help you submit your report and also track throughout the year. That's the first document here. These are guidelines for submitting annual statistics to the IPC. It really walks you through the report, and it helps you. It has a checklist at the very. This is very helpful too. At the end of the document, it has a checklist, a running checklist of what you're tracking during the course of the year. So you can adapt that, or use that particular checklist to help you track, and at the end of the year, use it to submit your statistics. So I think it's very helpful. The middle document here is the workbook and completion guide. This is specifically for the statistical report, and a feedback that we've received from stakeholders who are submitting the report is they often have this workbook and completion guide open. It's available on our website, and I will share these resources when we follow up with you to share the link to the recording on our YouTube channel. So it's also on our website under the guidance for organizations, mind you. But this particular completion guide, workbook and completion guide, it really mirrors to a very large extent the actual statistical report. So as you're inputting your report, it's helpful to have this book open and the statistical report open at the same time. That way, as you're inputting, if there are any errors or error messages, you catch them at the earliest opportunity instead of inputting it afterwards, right? So it's just some feedback we've received from members of all sectors, actually, child and welfare sector and other healthcare providers who are submitting their other statistical reports there. At any event, the third and final resource that I really wanted to draw your attention to is this webinar that we held a few years ago. It's on our YouTube channel, and it was really in anticipation of the January 1st, 2020 milestone, landmark milestone that brought in children and aid societies and other child and family service providers under Part 10. So when Part 10 came into force, we hosted this particular webinar that really walked service providers across access, privacy, and child in terms of Child and Youth and Family Services Act. I think it has helpful tips, and it's a good refresher for people who have been doing this for a while, or new employees as well, new staff people who are just starting out. So it's an excellent resource, I think. How to contact us. If you have questions, we've already received a number of questions, and we welcome anytime you do have any questions about your statistical report. Don't hesitate to reach out to us, to contact us with any of your questions. Simply contact us either by email, as you can see here. You can also call us and ask to speak with an information officer. We're more than happy to help you, and so don't hesitate to do that, okay? All right, well, thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a lovely day. Take care.